While gun battles are still happening in southern Israel, Israel has declared the state of war and is mobilizing. In this video, we are going to talk about why did Hamas attack Israel this very time? How is Iran involved? What do we know there? What is happening on the northern border with Hezbollah? And how is Israel going to react? What are the difficulties going to be they are facing in this war? On the morning of October 7th, 2023, Hamas struck Israel with a competently planned and very sophisticated terrorist attack in a scale that has never happened before. Several military installations were successfully overrun. Several towns and villages were also entered, even smaller cities. Still, to this very moment, now and then terrorists are appearing in those towns where the Israeli forces have re-entered and are starting running gun battles with Israeli armed forces. Basically, they stayed behind. They realized that their time is up, that they are still, that they have no way of breaking out anymore, and Israel discovers more. So while Israel has nominal control back over all its territory in the south, even though the map would indicate that it still is controlled by Hamas, it seems to be that the Israeli forces have now taken back their territory, but that doesn't mean they have cleared it in total. So far, over 800 Israelis have been killed, 260 alone on a music festival close to Gaza that, according to reports, was planned as a festival for peace. The terrorists there acted in a very, this is by the way, video of the festival area. The terrorists acted in a very competent way. They entered with trucks, with pickups, as well as with paragliders, basically doing an air assault. And according to the reports from survivors, they apparently encircled the area and even went to areas where the Israeli visitors of the festivals would likely flee, basically cutting off their retreat. When the crowd started fleeing, many of them ran in open ground and thus were easily hunted down by the terrorists, which led to at least 260 victims, 260 dead, deceased persons, and a ton of Israelis and visitors of the festival being abducted into the Gaza Strip. Among the persons abducted are several foreign citizens. I read about Germans, about Americans, other European countries, and even a Panamanian citizen was abducted into the Gaza Strip. Several women, lots of women, according to eyewitnesses, were raped right between the victims of, right between the corpses of other victims. And some of them were afterwards executed, others were abducted into the Gaza Strip and paraded around there. For Israel, and this has to be understood, this is not just a 9/11, it's worse than this. If we compare the numbers in demographics, this has been 9/11 times 10. It would be somewhere between 26 to 30,000 victims in case that this happened in the US compared to the total population, just to understand the scale of this event. The whole first Intifada did cost less lives. The first day of the Yom Kippur War did cost less lives. The second Intifada only had a little more victims than this, with the more than 800 dead. Right now we are roughly at 80% of the Israeli victims of the whole second Intifada that lasted for several years. So this is a terrorist attack in a scale that leaves Israel shocked. I heard claims that this is Israel's Pearl Harbor. This is by far not a comparison that's even coming close. The population is outraged and in utter shock. Everyone who has friends in Israel will be able to confirm this. Obviously, the videos being spread around of the humiliation of civilians that were abducted into the Gaza Strip don't help with the whole situation itself. The trust in the government is at a low point, and after months of infighting in Israel for political reasons, this came as a shock to the Israeli public. Right now, the United States have sent an aircraft carrier into the Eastern Mediterranean as a show of force and a sign of support, probably to warn warn Hezbollah and Iran to get involved. Israel has now mobilized 300,000 men in reserves. Some of them are being sent, or many of them are being sent to the south, but they're also reinforcing the eastern borders towards the West Bank, towards, and as well as to the north towards Hezbollah, to dissuade them from any idea of joining into the fighting. Right now we have the first engagements along the Gaza Strip. There are videos being spread around of Merkava tanks being hit with anti-tank guided missiles. The videos I've seen so far, though, showed the tanks surviving the hits, but we see that the engagements have already started. We'll have to talk about why this happened at this very moment. Here, it has to be seen in the context of the Abraham Accords. Israel is starting to make peace with more and more nations in the Arab worlds. Even a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia was ahead and expected to be signed fairly soon. Saudi Arabia, as the leading nation of the Sunni Arabs, would lead to other nations signing the peace agreements as well, depriving the Palestinians of support, of both political support as well as financial support. This means that Hamas needs to force the Arab nations to rethink their policies. They need to stop Saudi Arabia as well as other Arab nations signing peace agreements with Israel, because as soon as the peace agreements are signed, the interest in the fate of the Palestinians will diminish and Hamas will lose power, political power as well as financial means. At the same time, by starting their terrorist attack, Hamas is forcing Israel to react, and the expected high number of civilian casualties on the Arab side will stop any further progress, at least for now, for a peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. At the same time, it's discrediting all the governments that have recently signed peace agreements, basically meaning, how could you sign a peace agreement with those? As we can expect a lot of videos coming in the future of civilian victims inside of the Gaza Strip. And that all of this has happened basically to the day +1, 50 years after the Yom Kippur War, which was a complete surprise to the Israeli armed forces and which was seen as a victory among the Arabs, is no surprise. Hamas clearly wanted to show that they themselves are capable of doing something like the Arabs did in 1973, where, while they lost the war by any normal means, still were able to declare it a victory, as they had initial successes on the Golan Heights and as the Egyptians were able to cross the Suez Canal, wiping away and brushing aside the Israeli positions on the Sinai Peninsula. Now we will see the usual and expected developments from the Israeli side. First, the mobilization comes, or it did already come. Then we'll see the air attacks. They are also already happening. Israel will increase the pressure on the Gaza Strip. This was now announced, a complete blockade, including food and water and electricity, to put up the pressure against the Gazan population. Then come beheading strikes. There was already a report of Israeli special forces capturing a high-ranking Hamas person inside of Gaza Strip and taking him out of it. And if this mounting pressure is unsuccessful in achieving the intended goals of releasing the abducted persons, the hostages, then we can expect Israel's armed forces to enter the Gaza Strip. Now, what does this mean? This will lead to a ton of problems that we have to talk about. First, Hamas wants it. Hamas wants Israel to enter the Gaza Strip because only Israel entering the Gaza Strip will lead to the pictures that can prevent further peace agreements between Israel and Arab states. That's why it's clear, or it seems to be clear, that any negotiations that might currently be attempted will fail. Hamas will not hand over its hostages, as this might prevent an Israeli incursion into the Gaza Strip. Politically, it will also be it will be very difficult for the Israeli government to tell its own population how Israel can leave one stone on top of the other, how Israel can leave Gaza mostly untouched, and especially the structures of Hamas mostly untouched after 9/11 times 10 for Israel in this context. So what we have to see is that the Israeli public is asking for a complete destruction of Hamas that has to force the Israeli armed forces to enter the Gaza Strip with ground forces and crush them on the ground. This will lead to massive military problems as they have to enter a densely populated and densely built up area. To compare it, it has roughly the size of 40% of Berlin, while the population density is 30% higher. If you look on satellite pictures, there are less densely built up areas. There are even some agricultural areas, but the majority of the territory is at least mildly built up until up to cities and the refugee camps that have tiny areas, tiny streets where the defense, where the urban combat will be very challenging and struggling for the Israeli armed forces. The next problem the Israelis are facing, that Hamas had more than 15 years to prepare for an assault like this by the Israelis. This means that generally a lot of preparations, even in construction wise, are thinkable. For instance, pre-prepared positions for explosives. Think about what the Swiss did with their bridges, where they had explosives embedded into bridges. They just needed to fuse them in case of war, so they wouldn't have to mount explosives around the pillars. The pillars themselves actually had, we could probably call it, pouches where the explosives were permanently positioned. We can expect this to happen as the structure of the area is under control by Hamas. Hamas was able to basically even plan the building of the cities, the layout of the cities, to funnel Israeli soldiers in case of an attack in certain ways, and thus prepare death funnels in this way by explosives, by hidden slits to drop grenades on them, by firing slits, etc., etc. All of this will lead to massive casualties on the Israeli side, and according to Ibrahim Dalalsha, who is the executive director of the Horizon Center, a Ramallah-based think tank, there are up to 100,000 armed forces inside of the Gaza Strip, which roughly has 2 million personnel and a very young demographic. So 100,000 is probably not completely out of the realms of reality. If we include not just Hamas, but also Islamic Jihad and other armed groups that will likely help Hamas fight Israel in case Israel enters. Hamas itself will also hide in civilian areas, and not just because of the density of the area, but by design. There's, for instance, it's well known and documented that Hamas is using the basement of the Al-Shifa hospital as a command center and a command bunker. Even Palestinian sources have accused Hamas of doing this. Basically, they hide their command staff under a hospital, either forcing Israel to not strike them or forcing them to strike a hospital to take out the Hamas staff. This is being done throughout the area. They put weapon caches, they put firing positions in civilian buildings to force the Israelis either to leave them alone or to cause mass casualties among the civilian population. And even while Israel will try to prevent civilian casualties, for instance, by publishing maps before, as we can see here, in Arabic, telling the population of the Gaza Strip where they are going to strike and where they are supposed to flee to. This will still mean that a lot of the civilians will stay behind for various reasons. There are accusations again and again that Hamas forces them to stay behind, to use them as human shields as well. And even if a lot of them flee, there will still be plenty of victims, and at the same time Israel hands over the option for tactical surprise to Hamas, allowing Hamas to evacuate its personnel as well, as the warning has been given upon forehand. Now, while the fighting is starting, while airstrikes start and then ground assault will likely happen, every video of dead children, which is already in existence, already we see videos popping up, and there will be more and more of those videos popping up in the coming days and weeks. Every one of these videos will increase the pressure on Israel from the West, to stop the slaughter of civilians in the Gaza Strip. Every video will also rise up, will also enrage the Arabic street to increase the pressure on their governments to either stop any negotiations with the Israelis or even to break diplomatic relations. This will put pressure on the Israelis as at some point they will have to make the choice if they want to keep up the diplomatic relations, let's say with Morocco, or continue their military operations. So basically, every civilian casualty that will be documented is fine for Hamas, as they in the eyes of Hamas are entering paradise while they increase the pressure on the Israelis. At the same time, hundreds, if not thousands, of Israeli soldiers will likely become casualties in a densely built up area that is prepared, as I already said, for urban combat, which now includes drones, which will likely include camera surveillance, all the new measures that have been used in the Ukraine war. We've seen them in part already being used by Hamas, and we've seen a very competent Hamas for doing their terrorist attack 2 days ago. So we should expect the worst from them, that they have learned the best they could learn from the past 2 years of war in Ukraine. At the same time, more than 100 hostages are still in the Gaza Strip. They could be executed to put up pressure against the Israelis. And even if they are not executed, they will increase the pressure on the Israeli soldiers, as in houses they will not just face Hamas fighters, they will also face Palestinian civilians, and they might face Israeli hostages, so increasing the stress on the ground forces to be more cautious, and thus probably increasing the casualties on their side. A step back when we talk about this, a move back to the status quo would thus be a victory for Hamas if Hamas manages to achieve such a strike against Israel without being severely punished, without suffering for it to a degree that in their calculation of cost benefit it was a loss. They will present themselves as the victors, even if the death ratio of Israelis to Palestinians has massively tilted towards the Palestinian side. Israel's dilemma in this situation is how to recreate deterrence. Israel has to answer harshly, as the exchange of losses in equal numbers is a clear loss for Israel because of its demographics. And Israel and the Hamas, other terrorist organizations, openly say that they are willing and able to lose many more men for a fewer number of Arabs, of Jewish Israelis, as the numbers are on their side. So Israel will have to do to recreate deterrence in a way that even despite the fact that Hamas is willing to take a lot more casualties, both among its fighters as well as among the civilian population, that they still come out of this fight with the conclusion that it wasn't worth it. This means that the unproportionate damage is required to be done in the Gaza Strip, which will embolden at the same time radical Islamists worldwide, showing the brutality of the Israelis in the Gaza Strip. At the same time, this disproportionate damage to the Gaza Strip, to the civilian population, even if it's not intended, it's still because of the density of the area and the fact that an evacuation from the Gaza Strip doesn't seem to be planned right now, will cause problems to the Israeli support in the West. In the past, when we want to compare it with the battle for Fallujah, for instance, the Americans told the civilians to leave Fallujah, which a lot of them did. Now, Israelis can't allow the Egyptians to open the border crossing to, I think it's Rafah, because for the simple reason that this would lead to hostages being smuggled out to Egypt. They can't simply create a tunnel, a channel, whatever, buses, transfers to the West Bank, as this would also lead to hostages probably being smuggled out. So basically they would have to set up detention camps, screening every single civilian that is leaving the Gaza Strip, and we're talking about 2 million personnel, which is too much of a logistical burden to be realistic. Basically, the majority or all of the Palestinians will stay inside of the Gaza Strip, while Israel feels the need to do a disproportionately harsh strike simply out of necessity to recreate the deterrence needed in this context. At the same time, the big question will be what happens if they are successful? That's the next dilemma. Israel might be successful in capturing the Gaza Strip. They might be successful in taking out the majority of Hamas. They might manage to successfully recapture or liberate all the hostages, either dead or alive, but make sure that none of them are no longer in Hamas' hand. But what then? Who my English-speaking audience knows the saying, who breaks it owns it. And basically, Israel needs to have a solution what they do after they have captured the Gaza Strip, after they have taken out Hamas, because either they have to stay in there, restart their occupation, which was stopped in 2005. Since then, the Israelis have no longer been in the Gaza Strip except in military incursions after initial strikes out of the Gaza Strip. So they either need to re-establish the occupation, what nobody wants in Israel, or they have to leave it and hand over control to someone else. The Palestinian Authority under Mahmoud Abbas has no credibility. They are highly corrupt and have no legitimacy. They are disliked by the population also because of their collaboration with the Israelis. And if they should come to the Gaza Strip basically riding on Israeli tanks, they would lose all the remnants of their credibility they currently still have as some kind of opposition force towards the Israeli will. But there has to be somebody to hand it over, because otherwise, if Israel leaves it to their own demise, then anarchy will break out and even more radical groups might take over control. Some of you might have observed that the Islamic State tried to settle down, to try to get a foothold in the Gaza Strip, and was wiped out by Hamas, because even for Hamas they were too radical. So in this regard, this is the next big challenge that Israel will face. What if they are successful? Because whom to give the Gaza Strip afterwards, unless they don't want to stay in there for the next few decades, maybe even. And this is a big problem, because nobody in Israel really wants that. And on top, we can reference to Stanley McChrystal, the retired US general, who in the context of Iraq and Afghanistan also mentioned that killing a terrorist is not always the best solution, because while you might think that killing a terrorist means one terrorist less, it might also mean that there are 3 or 4 additional terrorists, as the relatives of the killed terrorist, his brothers, his father, his cousins, might then rise up and grab arms to start fighting. Israel is facing a classic dilemma. There is no good solution for this. Every option seems to be worse than the other, and that's not even all of it as of yet, because we haven't even talked about the international consequences and additional fronts that might open up. There are already some reports of fighting in the West Bank. So far it has been contained, so far it hasn't spread, but in the north there has been some action as well. But first let's talk about Iran, because the Wall Street Journal has published an article according to which the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, probably so likely the Al-Quds force, gave the Hamas the green light to basically start it. They were involved in it. Hamas has now publicly declared that they got aid from Iran. And the fact is, though, that there is no proof yet except for what they claim. The US, as we see here, CNN writing, they are still trying to find out how much of this is credible, because there is the actual possibility that this might not be true. Should Iran have been involved in this attack, this would basically be a declaration of war. And we need to see that this would be a declaration of war, not in figuratively speaking, not like this is like a declaration of war. This would actually be one. It would be like 9/11 10 times over, and the worldwide, my audience knows what happens after 9/11. Within a few weeks, the airstrikes in Afghanistan started, invasion of Afghanistan started, and the Iraq war is directly connected to it as well. So something 10 times smaller started, 2 huge wars. This would be a direct declaration and a direct act of war by Iran that Israel could not ignore. Iran in case they got involved in this. They would really clearly want to stop the rapprochement. I think it's in English it's pronounced rapprochement between the Arabs and Israel. Israel is its declared mortal enemy, and if the Arabs that are mostly Sunni, whereas Iran is Shiite, if they make peace agreements with Israel, then they might face an Israeli Sunni Arab bloc against Iran. That's one of the discussions that are already happening basically for decades, that supposedly Saudi Arabia would allow Israeli jets to fly through its airspace to strike Iran, etc. In case they actually open diplomatic relations, then this becomes much more likely. So for Iran, it's highly important to stop the rapprochement between the two sides as well. But that doesn't necessarily prove they have been a part of this. It's known that and it was recorded that there have been meetings between Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, but they are not new. They happen regularly or fairly regularly. And so far, at least publicly, there is no clear evidence that Iran was involved in it. And the next step would be to ask to what degree was Iran involved. If Hamas asked for some funding or said like, we will attack Israel in a bigger degree, are you fine with this? And they say, go ahead. That's obviously something completely different than if Al-Quds forces made detailed plans. They used their hacking, their surveillance to help with the actual assault on the ground. The degree of aid by Iran will also play a massive role to the degree to the point where it has to be decided whether or not Iran was involved in this. At the same time, Iran would likely not admit that Hamas has lied, that Hamas has claimed that Iran helped. Iran is gaining part of its legitimacy and some of its claim, the government, by the staunch opposition to the United States and to Israel. If a strike like this happens and Hamas says Iran helped us, for the Iranian government to say no, we had nothing to do with this, would probably be a loss of face. So at least there's a certain possibility that even if Iran wasn't involved, that they might not admit this, as it would be a problem for their public image. But if they were involved, a military consequence, a military reaction is not just likely, but also almost mandatory to recreate the deterrence that Israel has more or less been able to keep up, not just towards Hamas, but also towards Iran, as Israel would feel to be forced to strike Iran after this. This would likely draw the United States into it, as Israel is unlikely to strike Iran without coordination with the US. And as this is 9/11 times 10, as I've already said, it's likely that the US would, at least to a certain degree, actually help the Israelis in military strikes, and thus engulfing the whole Middle East into flames, into the flames of war. At the same time, Israel, for now at least, has the genuine interest to keep participation of Iran a secret, because the fact, if Iran is proven to have facilitated the attack, if Iran is proven to be basically the orchestrator of this attack, then they have to react, and the public will demand a reaction. And this is what the Israeli government can't want at the current position. They are facing a massive ground invasion into Gaza, where they might face 100,000 armed personnel. They have just mobilized 300,000, which they have to use to guard the northern front as well as the West Bank, while facing a massive ground combat in the Gaza Strip. To add Israeli strikes against Iran, and thus then the responding Iranian missile attacks on Israel, is the last thing they want to do. If they determine that Iran was involved, and if then they decide to strike Iran, it would likely be after they have taken the Gaza Strip. At least that would make sense in the context of not opening a front with everyone at the same time. To take the historic reference, not everyone is as stupid to attack the Soviet Union when he hasn't defeated the United Kingdom yet, as Hitler did in 1941. Hezbollah itself will likely observe the situation very to the point right now. So far, they have already fired on northern Israel. According to reports, supposedly Patriot batteries have been involved, which would indicate bigger missiles. But to a degree, even though it sounds weird, but Hezbollah has so far shown restraint. We have not seen the massive missile barrages that would be possible, as the lowest expectations I find currently from the current Hezbollah inventory of missiles is 150,000. The highest are up to 250,000 missiles. So Hezbollah could basically start a missile storm onto Israel, and we haven't seen that as of yet. We could probably see the attacks in the north more as a sign of solidarity. Basically, Hezbollah attacking Israel to show the Arab world and to show the Hamas that they are on their side, while trying to make sure that it's not escalating completely, getting completely out of hand. There were some reports about attempts to infiltrate Israel, and reports that the Israelis stopped this. Just now, before I finished the research, there was a report that Israel has killed one Hezbollah fighter trying to enter Israel. Even if those messages are true, we are talking about small numbers trying to infiltrate, not a massive assault by Hezbollah, which has tens of thousands of reservists and is probably the strongest terrorist organization in the world. So the issues that Israeli armed forces would face in the north would be much, much bigger on top of what they are already facing on the Gaza Strip, especially as Hezbollah, thanks to its connections to Syria and to the ocean, has a much more sophisticated arsenal of weaponry, including anti-ship missiles, including most modern anti-tank guided missiles, which they used in the past, for instance, to destroy Merkava tanks just a couple of years ago, showing highly sophisticated tactics. And we've seen Hezbollah fighting in the Syrian civil war, gaining valuable combat experience there as well. But at the same time, we see that according to Hezbollah itself, they would join a war in case it breaks out between Iran and between Israel, because they are directly connected. But we need to understand that Hezbollah is when it comes to domestic policies in Lebanon, they are weakened. They are suffering. Lebanon is suffering from very bad economics. Unemployment is high. There are huge problems inside of Lebanon, and the public might not be too positive if Hezbollah drags the country into a new war against Israel. And at the same time, we need to see, even though Hassan Nasrallah said that, that doesn't necessarily mean he follows through with it, because the Hezbollah is, while it might be the biggest terrorist organization in the world, it isn't just that. They have economic companies as well. They are a political party inside of Lebanon, and at some point the domestic demands for them might be stronger than a fruitless and pointless war against Israel. So this is undetermined as of yet. For Israel itself, it's a new challenge as well, not just because of the size of the terrorist attack, but Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister, will face tough problems as soon as the heat of the battle is over to stay in power. How? Because he is the prime minister, and he will have to take responsibility for that dramatic failure of the intelligence agencies. Currently, there are rumors swirling around that Egypt warned them like 10 days before the strike, and supposedly Netanyahu didn't listen to it, ignored it, and showed indifference towards the warnings. This is already disputed, so this might be fake news, but Benjamin Netanyahu will face tough questions, and this could obviously lead to him trying to redeem himself by being extra successful in this conflict, which might lead to some political decisions that have their influences on the military decision making that would not be done in the context of Israel's national goals, but more in the context of Benjamin Netanyahu's individual aims towards this conflict, basically for him to allow to stay in power by being extra successful or extra hard or something like this. This is also a factor that will, or might at least, play a role in this current fighting. Right now, it seems to be that a government of national unity will probably be built, with the two most important opposition parties joining the government. This has happened in the past in times of war, but we will have to see how it turns out. On this channel, I will obviously continue to observe it and try to research backgrounds for you, to give you deeper informations once this whole thing escalates even further, once new informations come up. So if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. If you like this summary, then please hit the thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm, and leave a comment what you think about the current situation and what Israel should do in the context of this unprecedented terrorist attack. As said, this is the biggest slaughter of Jewish lives since the Holocaust. This has to be understood, the context. This is out of anything that can be rationally put into a context by any other country, especially regarding the population size. As said, as the American viewers should understand what it would have meant, how 9/11 influenced them, and now imagine 10 times as many victims, what that would have meant. I think the calculation was Germany would have faced like 10,000 victims in a single day. This would shape the domestic policies even in countries like Germany as well to a massive degree. So we'll face drastic changes and drastic developments in the region of Israel and Palestine, and I will try to accompany it here and shed some light to it for all of us. As said, if you enjoyed this, please hit the thumbs up button, and this channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel, and that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.